Are things really how we see them? Is the instrument through which we look at the outside world really able to capture completely what it sees in front of it? Are we sure that whenever we see a thing, we see and perceive it in its entirety? In the things that are in front of us, we might just end up looking at a very small portion of it, because it is that portion which grabs our attention, which grabs our focus. And so the thing that is in front of us, we may think that we look it in its entirety, but it what we really look at is only a part of it. We look it only partially. We look towards the thing that we are focused or paying attention to. And even in that, the thing that we think we are attentively watching, perceiving, in that also there is a chance that we might end up overlooking, that we might end up not seeing. We might be in an illusion of how our mind really works. We may think that once we have seen a thing, we have completely understood or perceived it, but that might not be so. There is, much like selective hearing, there is also selective seeing, where we not only look at the part that we are focused and attentively looking at, but the thing also we are looking at might not be the complete thing visually. There is a certain mental blindness that is always involved in our perception, because the eye which looks at the outer world comes later. The entity which asks or which uses the eye to look the outward world comes first. And so this entity in itself has to be completely attentive, so as to allow the eye, allow the instrument through which it looks, perceive the thing entirely. If the entity that looks from within through the eye itself is unclear, so the thing that it will end up looking at through its eye is bound to be unclear too. Seeing is done by the mind first and later by the eye. It is entirely possible that we might be looking at something with our open eyes and still completely miss it, because inwardly our mind was at some place else, was not attentive. And so that inward inattention results in this visual blindness, which is not really visual blindness, but a certain mental blindness which leads to the eye not registering the visual in front of it. For the eye to register completely what is in front of it, the mind itself first has to be completely clear and free of any inward clutter that it has collected or it is preoccupied with. Without this clarity within, however sharp or however perfect our vision is, we would always be vulnerable to a fault in our seeing, in our visual perception. We may have a 6 by 6 vision, but that 6 by 6 vision would fail entirely if the one looking from the 6 by 6 vision is blind within. So it is entirely possible that a certain mental blindness, a certain state of mental drowsiness might lead to visual blindness also. So the way we think, we perceive the world and how the world actually is might just be two separate things. The way we think things are, they might not be that way. Together our mind and our eye might be telling us one story, but what is the exact story we may just not know. So we have to factor in this humility within, that whatever we see, perceive and understand might not be totally correct. Although we may like to think that whatever we see outside is accurate and is 100% correct because we have seen it, but that might be a false reality that we are believing in. This self belief that what I see outside might just be entirely true is illusory, because our eyes and our mind are continuously vulnerable to faulty understanding and faulty visual perception. There is a degree of mental blindness within all of us that we carry, and to be absolutely sure within that whatever I see is right is to have a illusory belief, is to be ignorant. Without understanding how our mind and our eye works, to claim that whatever we saw or understand was the ultimate truth or was the absolute truth is a self deceptive trick that we are playing on ourselves. Our conviction in that which we see has to be looked at and even challenged, because whatever we see is through our mind and through the eye. There is this ample amount of information that is outside which the eye absorbs, and then the mind within tries to make sense of it, and after computing all that information comes up with an understanding, and it is that understanding which it holds as the ultimate truth. So without knowing how our mind really actually works, we are entirely depending upon this process of information absorption and computing without even making sure that these two functions, that these two instruments have any fallibilities or not. Just because we have seen something does not automatically make it right, because the thing which we base our assumption of the thing that we have perceived being right is our own self. is our own mind and the eye. So, without understanding, without examining, looking, finding out whether these instruments are completely reliable or not, for me to claim that whatever I see is right is a practice in ignorance. There is much more to what our eyes and our mind are able to perceive on the surface, because what I see and what I understand is actually a definition or an extension of who I am. Whatever conclusion that I draw by what is in front of me gives me an insight into who I am. If there is a vast empty land in front of me, and upon seeing that land, if I think that to build houses on it would be a good idea, tells me about myself that I am a builder, someone who is interested in buying and selling of houses. The thing that I understand in front of me is my own personal understanding. It is not the absolute truth or conclusion that I have come upon. So, is it even possible for me to see things as they truly, as they really are, without my mind intercepting, without my biases interrupting in between? Is it possible for me to penetrate what lies beyond the surface? And not just be in this bubble of how I read things and how I understand them to be? Can I go beyond this bubble of limited self understanding, which is only a reflection of who I am, my own experiences, my thoughts, my memory, my past? Whatever I perceive in front of me is an extension of my own thought, which is a result of my past, my memory, my experiences. How am I to look past this bubble, this superficial perception, which is a result of my own experiences and the contents that my mind is filled up with? Is it possible that I let the mental blindness be, which is a result of my physical structure, of how the body is? My visual perception may have some flaws and fault, but is it possible that with this physical fault on the side, I am able to perceive psychologically without any flaw or blindness? Because my physical visual perception of the things rely on what is physical, which is the mind, which is the eye, and so I let that be and be aware of its fallibilities, of how it is vulnerable to deceiving its own self, of how it is vulnerable to illusions. I let that be, but psychologically, can there be a certain clarity, a completeness with which I perceive what is in front of me completely, entirely, without any flaw hole, or a gap. Apart from the two physical eyes, can there be an eye within which can look completely, which is able to perceive wholly? An eye which can see even when these two physical eyes are shut. And actually, it does not even matter whether these physical eyes are shut or open, the eye within is always passively alert, able to see, observe, and through this constant perception, observation, it is able to see psychologically without any faults, without any fragmentation. The physical eye, just because how it is and its heavy reliance on the mind, is liable to partial seeing, fragmented observation, but the eye within, through its alertness and passive awareness, observes the thing in its entirety, fully, and it doesn't require even that much of effort to do so. Only a glance is enough to perceive what is going on psychologically. It is this inward eye only which we can rely on, because whatever that sees outside is susceptible to illusion and a certain blindness, but this eye within, which can observe and understand and comprehend, it is only this eye that can see totally, which doesn't rely on anything outside of it, which doesn't require anything physical for it to comprehend or understand what is going on. Only this eye within can actually allow the eyes outside, the physical eyes, to see clearly as possible as they can, despite of their faults and despite of their tendency to deceive themselves. It is only this eye within through which we can see clearly what is without, because this eye is not dependent, it doesn't have a dependent existence. It is its own being, it is its own entity. It does not rely, depend on anything else. And when the physical eyes and the mind in tandem are in contact with this eye within, which is able to perceive, observe, and see wholly, fully, is when we won't be deceiving ourselves, is when we won't be lying and netting the web of illusions around us. The path out of ignorance, our inward ignorance, can be only seen through this eye that is within.